Hi everyone, if you're just tuning in. As usual, we're going to wait a few moments to allow more people to arrive, and I don't suppose when if you want to maybe share this page to this link to any pages you have.
Sure. I don't know how to whilst I'm talking on Zoom though. But
All right.
Do it after, if that's any good.
Say again, sorry.
I can do it afterwards if that's any good.
That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Cool.
no.
Thank you.
All
Do
right.
it after.
Let's see. Cool. 10 people. Welcome everyone. Yeah, we'll start in just a couple of moments here. Just making sure everything's set up. That's better. Okay. Can people who are just arriving confirm that we are audible and visible? And then we can begin.
I am okay with I can hear. Okay.
That's great. Glad to hear it went. Cool. Yep, says Luby Lou. Good morning, you two. I can see you. Thanks, Vicky. Okay, then we will begin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Welcome.
Yes.
Welcome to the Naughty Autie in Conversation. Today I'm joined with Dr. Wenn Lawson. Hi, Wen.
Hi.
Hi. Dr. Wenn Lawson is autistic and ADHD plus psychologist, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, lecturer, researcher, family man with autistic offspring and autistic grandchildren, writer and poet who has shared his experiences, writings and resources for over 3 decades. When has published and contributed to more than 25 books and many papers. When is an associate researcher with Curtin University and Macquarie University.
Macquarie, yeah.
Macquarie, and tutor practitioner with the University of Birmingham's Masters Autism course, a member of the Autism Cooperative Research Centre, co-chair of the Autism Research Council Australia, ambassador for ICANN Australia on the editorial board for Autism in Adulthood, and joining the US Autism Association Advisory Board in September 21. Dr. Wenn is a member of the ND Co Australia, who put out monthly resources regarding autism. Wenn runs his own business, has a YouTube channel and homepage. In 2008, he won 4th place as Victorian Australian of the Year, and in 2017 he presented to the United Nations on matters of autism and aging. Goodness me, Wenn. Very, very accomplished. Nice. So yeah, I have some questions here, and as usual, we're going to start off with the question I traditionally ask first. How and when did you discover that you were autistic?
Yeah. In 1993.
Okay.
Before then, I had an assessment or a diagnosis of intellectual disability and schizophrenia, and I'd been in and out of mental institutions for more than 25 years. Oh. So it was a full-on thing. And I read a book by a lass who was actually living here in Australia, although she originated from the UK. And it was a book given to me by my wife for my 40th birthday, I think. And I read that book and I thought, wow, there's so much here that I identify with. So I said to my psychiatrist, I don't think I'm schizophrenic. And he said, a lot of schizophrenics don't think they're schizophrenics, When? And then I said, I think I'm autistic. And he said, oh, that's a new one. I said, well, there's a team at Monash University in Melbourne, and I'd really like to go and spend some time with them to check this out. And he was very cooperative. It took him about 3 months, I suppose, to read the book and to think, there is some things here that are echoes of what you're talking about. So he referred me, and I got an assessment at that clinic, and they said, you're not schizophrenic, you're autistic. And later, a few years later, I got a diagnosis of ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, auditory processing difficulties. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a journey.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Are you an Aussie or are you a Brit?
Good question, Harry. I think of myself as Australian, but I was born in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
You hears different things online. You know, you're on one website, you're described as a British psychologist, and others Australian.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm both.
okay, got it.
Yeah.
So at the risk of starting off with a question that's a little broad, what is autism?
Yep. I think autism is quite different to the way it's portrayed in most textbooks, actually. And I think there are varying profiles within the autism spectrum. It is a spectrum, which makes it quite different for most of us. It's not heterogeneous. That means it's not the same for everybody. But what we do find, and what the research is showing, that seems to be the case for every person I talk to, presents differently according to their personality and profile, but is that they seem to have a brain that is better at doing one thing at a time. And if you're ADHD, that might be serial fashion with your fingers in lots of pies. But we call this being monotropic. And my PhD in 2009 was all about single focused attention in autism, and some work I did with Manny Casanova in Louisville in the States was clearly evidence of how the autistic brain works quite differently. And it means we're really good at detail, but not any old detail, just detail we're interested in. We thrive when we're working with our passions, and outside of those things, we disconnect. And it is quite hard to connect, especially socially, when the social world for non-autistic people tends to be full of, this is naughty of me, but it's full of lies and deceit, to be honest. It's full of pretending to be what you're not so that you fit in and belong. And as autistic people, we've spent far too long camouflaging who we really are to try to appease or please the societies that we're part of to fit in, and that's come at a high cost. So autism, I believe, is a brain disposition which is quite different to the allistic or non-autistic population. They're what we call polys. Nothing to do with parrots, although some might think so. Poly just means many, and mono, which is us, means singular or one, and tropism just means channel. So it's the way that the brain operates in autism, single-minded, single-focused, makes it a bit difficult to read black and white things. We're often quite literal. But if there's a PDA profile, there's a desire to be social, which is quite different to a non-PDA profile. So autism presents differently according to personality and profile, but always with that single focus thinking.
Yes. And it's interesting actually, because often in PDA literature, children, because obviously most of the literature is based on children, we need more research into PDA in adults, but the children are frequently described as having stronger eye contact. And I actually believe there could be a monotropic explanation for this, given that we are more people focused. People become our special interests, and therefore the tunnel is pointing right in their direction. So it's like kind of, I'm looking straight at you because you are the source of my monotropic input right now.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah,
absolutely. Yesterday, I finished reading The Passionate Mind.
All right.
Beautifully done. A really, really, really lovely read.
Thank you.
Very highbrow and academic, but you write in a way that's very, very accessible as well. So I highly recommend this book to all of you who haven't read it already. It's called The Passionate Mind: How People with Autism Learn. And you employ a term, single attention and associated cognition, in autism. Would you still use that terminology? And
I still, I refer to SACA.
Say
very often just being single focused, passionate. Yeah.
Yeah, because one of my questions was monotropism, Saker. Is there, are they synonymous?
They are sort of, but I believe Saker actually takes things a bit further than just being monotropic,
Okay.
because it actually moves into everything that an autistic person is. So our sensory situation, profile, our interoception, connection to self and internal stuff, our object permanence and understanding that things can still exist even if they're out of sight. That's not just objects, that's people and emotions and a whole heap of things. So Seiko actually encompasses slightly more, actually quite a bit more than the actual thinking of monotropism, which is the start and the foundation,
Sure.
but it's not the end.
Okay, I see. Do you think Saker could explain why autistic children have such a hard time in the traditional education system?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, because one thing, there may be some sensory stuff going on there, which totally takes them over. They can't switch off, so they're not available. They don't have available attention to focus in a classroom. It might be the words that are all jumbled up and going too fast, so that again, they can't note what's going on. And this is certainly true for auditory processing issues, which is what I've found during my life. ADHD is about 70% more common in autistic people, so they may not be focused enough to finish before they move on. So many things, and it's absolutely all tied in.
Sure, and the issue as well of the school curriculum being imposed upon us, and acknowledging that, hey, all of these topics are not related to my interests right now. So how the heck am I meant to compromise what my current interest is?
Yeah.
And move away from it and just wholeheartedly embrace everything you're throwing in my direction without my consent.
It's really hard. When I was doing the equivalent to the CSCs in England, is that what you call them?
GCSEs.
GCSEs. When I was doing that, the equivalent here in Australia, in Victoria, we had VCEs, and I had to do Australian history. And my topic was we had to do the 1930s, and I wasn't particularly interested in the 1930s, but I was really interested in engines.
Right.
So how do I bring engines into the 1930s? Well, we had female pilots who flew airplanes that were run by piston engines. And so I enabled my focus, and I did that for all of my subjects. I brought my interest into it so that I could connect to something of that ilk.
Yes, right. This is interesting because I read that you referenced the work of Paula Cluth,
yes,
who describes this process of kind of building bridges between your interests and perhaps a topic that falls outside of what I call the sphere of importance, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I kind of call that primary and secondary activities. So I'll describe how you could be trying to teach an autistic child to read and they resist it, right? Let's imagine they're PPA and they resist it. And I say, you're trying to present reading as a primary activity, a primary focus. Instead, you're much better off finding out what their current primary focus is, what their interest is, and then see how you can incorporate reading into that, perhaps present reading as a secondary activity. So they're really, really, really into Greek mythology. Now, introduce reading as a vehicle with which they can navigate Greek mythology, right?
Totally.
That kind of thing. So
yeah,
you have to use the interest as a starting point. Otherwise, you won't access them, you won't reach them.
Yeah, that's right. And what has been happening is people have used an interest as a reward. You can have your laptop at the end of, but that's the wrong way round. Your iPad at the end. That's not the right way to go about it. That should be brought into the curriculum and into the lesson. Because as autistic people, that's like our wheelchair. You wouldn't rob somebody of a wheelchair or of a hearing aid if that's what they needed.
Yeah.
And it's the same as autistic people. We need those things to actually connect us.
Yeah.
In the work we did with Manny Casanova in Louisville, we found that gamma, this is, you know, you got beta waves, theta, various wavelengths that do various things in your brain, but gamma, which works at a different frequency altogether than the others anyway, don't get too technical, actually gamma makes sense of the others. So if gamma is offline, isn't switched on, isn't available, you can't connect to what's coming in through the other information waves. And we did some experiments with some young people, seeing what their brain was doing when they weren't interested, and looking at their brain when they were. When they weren't interested, gamma was scattered and not available. So they were literally switched off. Their brain was not switched on. When they were interested, the young man had a fascination with sharks. He had a poster of sharks, and he could tell us everything about these sharks, you know, where they ate, the kind of waters they swam in, and how they bred and everything. When he was looking at that, his gamma was switched on and available to make sense of the other information. Okay. Outside of that, it was offline. And I published a paper on this in 2012. Okay. Really important stuff that educators should be aware of.
And it's so simple, really. It really is, because in my experience in working with schools, they mix up the child's rights with their privileges. And as you said, use the iPads or the technological devices as destinations. Like, if you do the work now, eventually you can get to what it is you're craving. I'm like, no, there's a clue within what they feel they need right now, and you can utilize that to your advantage as an educator. Like, seriously, you allow us to stick by our interests, and they're worried that it's going to be a restrictive process, but no, quite the opposite. You know, we will branch out quite rapidly. All we need is the vehicle of interest, and then we can take that wherever. You're into poetry, cool. You can go to Elizabethan times, you can go back to Shakespeare, you can go to the French Revolution, you can go back to ancient China, ancient Greece. You have so much scope if you just hold on to the interest and travel around.
Yep,
you know,
totally.
I wish educators would get this, because
I wish they would too. They seem to think that it's like a special thing for the autistic kids and the others are not allowed, so why should this child be? They fail to recognize the essence of equity. It's not same, it's equity, and it's being equitable, enabling, and making life and education accessible. Vastly different.
Exactly. I suppose they can't help but feel, oh, we're indulging them too much. You know, we're indulging them in screen time. We're indulging them by allowing them to pursue interests. It's like, no, it's the interest is nutrition. You know, it's like depriving us of oxygen or vitamin C. You know, we need that in order to optimally function, you know, in the world.
And maybe that term special interest or focused interest even hasn't done us good.
Okay.
That's why I called the book The Passionate Mind, trying to change the way we see interest. It's not a choice. Autistic people are not able to operate outside of being connected, and where their attention is where their connection is.
Exactly.
We have to join them there.
Yes. Oh, that's so validating. That's so validating, because I'm saying that constantly on my page. So to hear you, Dr. Wenn Lawson, echoing that back is really, really validating. Thank you. Interest it's all we've got, really, in order to make sense of the world.
It is.
It's very curious when we consider probably around a third of autistic children develop language late, right? And I'm always interested in why that is. So a proportion of PDA children are the same, and that's usually attributed to, well, you're kind of, language is forced upon us, if we think about it, isn't it? You know, it becomes like a structured activity. Now you're going to learn language, so you can imagine a
demand.
Absolutely not. But then for those who aren't PDA, it's probably and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. But if we consider the 1-year-old to 18-month-old infant, for whom language isn't a necessary skill right now. You know, it's like, no, I'm busy focusing on this. I don't need language, you know. It's not it's not, there's no utility to language based on what I'm doing right now. It's not a currency. It's not I don't need to talk to you, I don't need you to talk to me. I'm busy focusing on this interesting object on the ground.
Yeah, totally.
So I wondered how connected language was to interest in those early years.
Yeah, I guess I have my own thoughts about it, but I didn't talk till I was nearly 5.
Okay.
And those 5 years were really me busily trying to work out so many different things, who I was, who the people in the household were, why things changed and what that meant. I had no room for language, and I got what I needed by taking my mum's hand to the fridge, or I found other ways to communicate. And I'm also a synesthesic, so rather than typically feeling emotions like happy and sad and angry, to me these are expressed as a color. So I had a lot of stuff to sort out. Why was there a yellow snowstorm over mummy and a brown one over daddy, and what did it mean? Because I hadn't any concepts. And people say you don't get concepts until you get language, but that's not actually true. Concepts are much more available to us pre-language, and if we're not careful, language can knock them away. So we need to be building, connecting. That might be rough tumble play, that might be lots of fun and games, get down on the floor, on the trampoline, whatever it is, and build connections to that young person. Because once they've got a freedom of attention, they don't have to work something out, language is more available. And if they never ever speak, it's like, I really don't care, talk is cheap, anybody can do it. You know, it's not the end of the world. There's so many means to communicate. They are harder. Typing through an iPad or through a light writer or some sort of machine is harder. But for some of our young people, it isn't just language, it's the dyspraxia that goes with that, that makes locating the words, putting them together, using the right movements and body language and so on, slows everything down. So sometimes everything just takes that bit longer. And some young people need support, like they need assistance with language. I have a very good friend here in Australia called Tom Chan, and he's really struggled with a school that would not allow him a light writer in the class, wouldn't allow him to type. He doesn't speak. So it really knocked him back. He's at university now and he's doing well, but it's really hard work. So we need to listen and get to know people as individuals. We're all different.
Absolutely. There's no one size fits all approach. Of course. I was thinking about the term executive functioning, which you touch on in the book as well. And I think you briefly touched upon this, if not, I misunderstood the point. But obviously our executive functions allow us to strategize, plan, decision make, initiate task, see task through to the end without getting distracted, completing task, etc. But what, if any, differences are there when it comes to executive functioning in the autistic experience and executive functioning issues when a person sustains perhaps a traumatic head injury? Because as far as I'm aware, I noticed this in my experience and in that of the people I work with, executive functioning issues cease to be upon the arousal of interest, right? So I will have difficulty initiating launch sequence if I am expected to carry out a task that could not be further away from my interest. But once I am interested, it's like, yeah, what executive functioning, you know?
Yes.
So
yeah.
Can you understand my point? Because
totally, yeah.
Stroke or sustain a traumatic head injury,
yeah.
The executive functioning problems are kind of pervasive, but for us, the problems seem to be contingent upon the absence of interest.
Yes, interest enables a lot of things, including executive functioning. Now, if you're ADHD as well as autistic, that's going to capture interest, and there's a sort of circular monotropic disposition that calls you away and distracts. That's a separate thing to autism, but they're often combined, and people overlook that sometimes. Impulsivity is often combined. A number of things that co-occur, but in autism per se, when you're interested, you do well. You finish work, you complete stuff, you move on to the next, you organize really well, as long as it's within the plane of that interest.
Right.
Because that's where your attention is. You're in this attention tunnel. Outside, over here or over there, I'm not connected to that.
Right. Okay. So what I love about the advocates and the researchers within the autistic community is we're kind of all describing the same thing in a way, you know. So you're describing it as within the tunnel, and I described it earlier as the sphere of importance. And it's like, oh yeah, it's a matter of semantics. So I can remember as a child, my brother, who's a couple of years younger than I am, was quite sociable. He'd always be out playing, and my mum found it strange that I'd rather stay in, and she would always kind of say to me, you know, oh, you know, Harry, why don't you go out and play? And I remember just feeling like, why would I do that?
Yeah.
Like, I'd ask, I think, like, why? What is the purpose of such a fruitless, bootless, you know, endeavor?
Yes.
Then when I started playing music, I'd suddenly be determined to speak to other children because I wanted to get a band together, right? So suddenly it's like the tunnel moves. It's a migrating tunnel in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, I was thinking about what schools could actually do in order to accommodate the autistic experience, because would it be an interest-based curriculum? Would it be as simple as, you know, educators just tap into our interests and we work and we go from there?
I believe so. I really believe so. Because everybody has different interests.
Yeah.
And because sometimes interests, some schools will say, are destructive. They might be fearful of the fact that this kid's interest is only about water, sexuality in your body, guns and gunpowder and blowing people up. You know, they get, and I say to them, there's actually a lot you can. We had a guy who was really into Nazi and Hitler, and there's so much that we could have, and the school did in the end, work with that young person and educate them about morality, about people's thoughts and the impacts that we have on each other, and all sorts of stuff that came out of that curriculum. But had they run away from it because it seems dark, they would have missed a golden opportunity.
Okay, that's a good point, actually, because I can remember working with a young boy who became obsessed with the N-word, and I remember saying to his parents, I understand at this point every part of you is gonna want to try and suppress this, but I said, instead of encouraging it, or maybe can we see this as an opportunity for learning? So they actually took him to a museum. I believe it was a museum of African history, right? And so he could actually contextualize the word, and suddenly he had a sense of what it really meant, and that had a profound effect on him. And I said,
yes,
if you would have taken the alternative route, which is to say try and suppress and reinforce the idea of the taboo, and he was PDA, right? So you know, he knew that it was taboo. He knew that it was socially and morally questionable / unacceptable. So I said, you have to try and put this word in a vacuum and strip it of any kind of immoral connotation and place it in context.
Yep. Totally.
As opposed to just trying to, oh no, you can't say that, you know.
It's hard work, and it's very challenging for the non-autistic population because we're suggesting they think outside the box, and it's really hard. It's very hard to do. And teachers are trained, and they've got to deliver the curriculum, and they're being, you know, Ofsted is going to come in and check that you're doing this and you're doing that, and it's really hard. And I'm not downplaying how hard it is, but the results that they will see when they work with a young person are amazing. And that person will grow up and be an adult one day. And who knows, you know, they might be, their interest in vacuum cleaners might take them into becoming an electrician. We don't know.
Yeah.
But please don't squash that interest. There's a beautiful school I remember visiting, and the young man, fascination was with smoke alarms, you know, just loved and carried around. He was allowed to bring 3, I think, to school. Right. You think, well, what can you learn from a smoke alarm? Well, you can do shapes, you can do maths, you can do language and literacy. There's actually a lot of stuff you can do around smoke alarms. You can talk about danger, you can talk about safety, etc. So it doesn't have to be, you know, knock it all out, because this is different and this is foreign. We're different as autistic people. Our heads are different, and if you want to work with us and support with us, then you've got to work with our interest.
Right, exactly. Let me see what I've got here. I'm very interested to know what your thoughts or views are on PDA as an autistic academic.
I totally endorse that there is such a thing. There's lots of arguments out there that it doesn't exist, and that it's actually just a form of the other words, which I can't remember, which are very destructive.
ODD?
Not, yeah, is that defiant disorder? Oppositional defiance disorder, yeah. PDA is not that. We're not being oppositional for the sake of it. We're not being oppositional. We're not actually being oppositional. We're actually seeking personal autonomy. That's what it's about. And people forget what's behind this. And I see it as very much based in anxiety and in fear, for whatever reason. Some research talks about that part of the brain being bigger. Other research talks about it being smaller. It's kind of irrelevant. It's about working with that individual, helping them feel safe, building relationship, giving them autonomy, respect. It's mutual. And unfortunately, in our society, we have this kind of thing that adults are the betters, and the children, you know, that this is still existing, should be seen and not heard. Now, that's a very generational thing, way back from my parents' generation, but it still exists. You don't have rights as a kid, and that's not okay. So I think PDA, personal demand for autonomy, is very real, definitely exists, not just in autism actually, but, you know, for whatever reason, we need to work with young people for how and who they present, not against them. That's no good at all. It just increases trauma. That's all it does.
Yeah, of course. Sorry about that. Yes, absolutely. I think that is almost a gift of PDA to society, right? Our tendency to not recognize status. You know, I don't recognize that you are my superior in this situation. It's completely mind-blowing, and I will resist based on the fact that you somehow conceitedly and erroneously believe, as the adult, you have power and authority over me.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I'm not moving, and that's good. You can pathologize that all you want,
like.
in a medical context, but hey, no, this is good. Thank goodness this child is resisting that kind of generational thinking. You know, obviously it's
totally,
because before people arrive at that level of understanding, it's distressing, because you're kind of trying to sustain an old-fashioned narrative and way of life. But it's like, no, when you understand that, no, seriously, this child is capable of a lot, so long as you allow them their autonomy, right? So
absolutely, yeah. Yep. I have PDA grandchildren, a PDA wife, a PDA cat, absolutely.
PDA cat,
and definitely.
PDA, yeah. I do too.
Oh golly, relationship and respect have to be mutual, and there's no place for power.
Absolutely. And again, it's like when we were discussing earlier about, hey, educators, just take a genuine interest in their interest and you're good. It's the same with PDA. It's like, stop fighting, stop resisting, stop holding on to your authoritative role with reciprocity and fair exchange. Cool. Just
Yeah,
remember
totally.
that and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Personal demand for autonomy as well. I love that, because we get to keep the
Yeah.
PD, but we completely rehabilitate it.
Yeah.
So that's,
We take the pathology out. I have an issue with pathology in general because it makes us less than human, and that's not okay.
yeah, absolutely. So being autistic is, you know, it's just a variation in human.
Yep.
Yeah. What about when people resist that idea? What if people said to you, oh, but hey, my son can't talk, my son can't do anything without me, my life's a living hell, blah blah blah, you know?
Yeah. And that is the case for some people, and it's very sad. And I have a lot of empathy for such an individual, and I long for services and the rest of the world to step up and support, for families to support each other. There's still that generational thing where grandparents don't, you know, you just need to discipline, and they don't support the parents in the way that they need. And that's sad, and it's disappointing, and it's frustrating, and it's wrong. I can't fix it, unfortunately, but I certainly wish it were different.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to like when I hear the word independence used a lot, like my child is not independent, you know, and
Yeah, it's a myth.
Independent, it's very broad actually, because
Yeah,
what you're describing is practical independence, right? Your
yeah,
child may be practically dependent on you, but
yeah,
in many cases they are socially independent more than you are, right? So it's a matter of this kind of lesser versus you know, more, better versus worse mentality.
We need to take that word out of the vocabulary and
Yeah.
swap it for interdependence. We all need one another, and learning how to appropriately be interdependent is really useful and good. I'm not talking about emotionally dependent in a wrong way. I'm talking about, yeah, respect and sharing in the way that humans need to. It's a myth that they say autistic people don't need others. That's not true either.
Sure. So we have some questions here. Who is independent in reality? We all co-regulate. Yeah, I agree, Roberta.
Yeah.
That's a very, very good point. Also, I sometimes take issue with non-autistic parents who may come onto my page or other pages, other groups, and declare that they want their child to reach their fullest potential. And I kind of, even though that sounds perfectly understandable as a parent, I kind of wince a little, because it's like, yeah, but what's the difference between your idea of their fullest potential and their
and theirs?
Because if it is, I hope that they learn to speak and learn to control themselves and behave themselves and get a good job and, you know, live in a nice house with a white picket fence. It's like, that's a very prescriptive idea of fullest potential, right?
Yeah.
They won't learn to verbally acquire language ever, and that's okay, right?
Yes.
Fullest potential means something else.
Yeah. It's like stopping the deaf community from signing and then imposing speech, which, you know, happened for quite a long period of time. So they were segregated and separated from their peers because they couldn't communicate with one another. Once signing was introduced and that whole language, and to watch a group of young people or older people in the deaf community sign and share with one another is fabulous. You know, I can't sign, unfortunately. I wish I was able to, but that's magic. And it's the same kind of thing.
Absolutely. Someone asks, how realistic is it to want to start training to become a clinical psychologist at the age of 30 when you have the executive functioning skills of roadkill and live in chaos?
Yeah, well, that's me. I went back to school at the age of 38 and did years 11 and 12. I started my psychology degree when I was 40. I didn't finish and complete things and eventually get my PhD in psychology till I was 52, I think I was. So I'm pleased that I did pursue, and I recognize the things that I can't do and I let them go. I'm supported by a beautiful wife who's really good at some of those things I can't do. She does numbers, I do words. So I'm very thankful. And it's hard living in chaos. I need order around me because of the chaos within me at times. You know, if you saw my office, looks all right in the picture.
I was going to say,
believe me, it's very different.
you don't want to
Lots
see
of soft toys and things that go different colors. You know, I'm surrounded by them because they're my friends. They keep me sane. But it's not the things that I really work hard on are to keep client confidentiality and files. And I've, you know, the ethics of being a psychologist are really, those things are really important. But if the washing up don't get done, or I'm wearing the same t-shirt 3 days in a row, to me that is not as important. Okay. I'm pleased that I did do my training and qualified and registered and so on. It's the best thing for me because that's what I wanted. I'm a social worker as well, but I don't function as a social worker. That's not where I belong. Psychology is where I belong and where I thrive.
Okay, that's inspirational. Thank you, Wen. Danielle says, when said autistic people are single-minded, however, I'm a multitasker, but I'm ADHD and I believe PDA. Is that why I like to juggle tasks as opposed to single focus, the challenge?
Yes, they're probably multitasking, but serial fashion. So that means you take what you're interested in and you start one thing. I know this happens to me. I start one thing, I see something else I'm interested in, that captures me, calls me away, and then something else. And I actually find it quite hard to finish anything, which is a bit of a problem sometimes. But and I multitask within my interest. So if I were driving a car, I'm not allowed to because I haven't got a license, but cars are a passion. I know how to drive. Then, you know, changing gear, looking where you're going, managing to drive, listen, look and do all the things you've got to do. It's multitasking, but it's within your passion. So it's actually single focused multitasking.
Right. Okay. So it's like sub focuses within one focus kind of thing.
Yeah. If you're a PDA and you're ADHD, that's us. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I describe the inbuilt curriculum, right? So I recognize that my interests change very rapidly. So I usually I have a window of opportunity in which I can absorb information about that interest until the time expires, right? So I'm on a I notice I'm on a timer, but I can't tell myself on a timer because then, oh no, that's but I noticed that growing up, and occasionally my interests would intersect with school. And that was confused. It was always confusing for us. They were like, I don't get it, you know, because in a maths class, he's intent on destroying the lesson for everyone else. But then when we're doing astrophysics and astronomy, he's just, wow, man, you know. And in a French class, he's a boisterous so-and-so again, you know. So that's interesting. So I'm sure many people here can identify with, well, we have this session of interests, right?
Yes, we do.
It's not just trains that we stumble upon in childhood that remain. It's like, trains 1 minute, snails the next, astronomy the next, you know, it's like, wow. It's just.
And because we're all different, it might be trains for some people that go on all their life. But for those of us that are a bit more like you and I, we tend to switch and swap a lot.
Yeah. So this is where people may say, oh, ADHD, PDA, you know, that we both do that, right? So that is a good question. And I really want, I'm not necessarily asking you as an autistic researcher and psychologist to look into this, but oh gosh, I want to know what the essence of PDA is, because we know it's there, but still sometimes we may go to describe phenomena and it's like, yeah, but that sounds like this, that sounds like this, but it's so hard to pinpoint.
It is elusive, Harry. It's really hard, and I agree with you. I wish someone would take it up.
It's PDA about being discovered, I say.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It's PDA about being accepted in, you know, by professionals, and it's PDA about being understood, you know. But by golly, is it there?
Yeah. No, totally agree.
Yeah. So now people are just saying some lovely stuff. Someone, Emma Fleetwood, who I believe you're in Australia, Emma, aren't you? When are you still involved with the South Australian Education Department, or did COVID put us, or I heard possibly put a stop to that?
COVID did unfortunately put a stop to that. So I was living in one state called Victoria and working in South Australia for the Education Department for the South Australian government in the complex needs team. But flying across borders shut. And because I personally like to work with the kids and in the schools, and the whole thing changed, you can't really do it on Zoom in the way that I needed to. So yes, that fizzled out. I also had what they call a TIA. It's like a stroke last October, and was it the year before? I can't remember. Quite recently, and that put paid to some of the things that I needed to be doing as well, because I lost some functionality. And I thought, okay, I'm probably doing too much as a ADHD, PDA, autistic person. I tend to be constantly on the go, and I don't find it hard. I find it hard to not be on the go. My body is telling me I need to slow down a bit. So,
okay,
yeah.
How are you feeling now?
I'm not too bad. My knee is. I just come out of hospital. I've had a total left knee replacement, and it's interesting because when I'm interested in what I'm doing, I don't even notice the pain. Better than opioids.
Of course. And yeah, people feel free to ask some questions. I'm just scrolling through just to see if I haven't scrolled past any. Let's have a look. Well, people back, you mentioned, do you think the term special interest is problematic?
I do, actually.
Yeah.
I prefer passions.
Okay.
Passionate interest, possibly focused interest, being focused, being interested. But special interest almost puts it down as a special needs thing.
Yeah, and I do get it. And I
switches me off.
Sure, I understand people's argument against the use of special interest. I do kind of hang on to it.
Okay.
Probably because PDA reasons. I tend to travel in the opposite direction of what's common use.
Specialized.
Yeah. But also I want to distinguish autistic interest and autistic passion from that of the non-autistic population. And I'm very, very happy to use an alternative term, but until then, like, I may say specialization occasionally, or I'll emphasize on the intensity of interest we feel. But yeah, it's like there's something more to it, right?
Yeah, makes sense, Harry.
Yeah. So that's it. People are saying I like the passionate term. Absolutely. Someone's asking, what about? Oh goodness me, it's jumping about the comment section. Here we are. What about children gifted with autism PDA? Can their language be early because of their gifted? Oh, so as in giftedness. Okay. What about children gifted who are autistic and PDA? Can their language be early because of their giftedness? Good question.
It absolutely can. There's no one size fits all. So I looked at a video the other day of a little person who was probably maybe 11 months old, talking like an adult in the bath and singing happy birthday to a parent. And it would be unusual. But from what I know about this young person and their family, I can see how that's come about.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I acquired language very early. But talking has always been so important to me. Just it's like even before I was talking, I was like straining to get involved, in conversation. And I guess for me, it is a viable mode of communication, right? So that makes sense. But to someone else, perhaps not so much. So I suppose it would be an interesting it could be an interesting combination of some kids who are gifted plus see verbally spoken language as essential for getting their point.
Yeah, I was very delayed in language, and even though words I love, reading, I'm dyslexic, so I read particularly, usually not from books, but I read on a Kindle or online. Find that easier personally. But it's still hard, and they're a bit of an enigma to actually grasp sometimes and bring them into a conversation. I know I've got all this stuff I want to say, but I can find myself tripping over them to get it out. And if it's in a very busy group sort of situation, forget it. I disappear into the woodwork, go and wash up the dishes or something instead.
Yeah. Okay. Someone's asking, what do you think of the connection between PDA and addictions?
I think it's quite a strong connection, unfortunately, and it's very common. I don't know why that connection is there, but possibly because of that drive to avoid demand and to go the other way. So the need to dull things through alcohol, through drugs, etc., is pretty strong. And because society says that that's bad, don't do it, we're more likely to do it. So for a whole heap of reasons.
Yeah, sure. I've thought about this quite extensively. Another thing is that, well, it's withdrawal into fantasy, right?
It is.
And that's part of the PDA main characteristics. We like to withdraw into fantasy world. So it's like video games. It's like, wow, it's passive withdrawal. I don't even have to do anything. I don't even have to make an effort to conjure up an imaginary world. You're just transporting me effortlessly.
Yeah.
There could be a similar underlying process as well, like the compulsion to step away from that which is demanding, you know, can be similar. It's a bit like like in an OCD sense, the compulsion to do versus the compulsion not to do, right? So there could be a similar thing going on there. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's very hard because obviously it's very difficult to undo, and I think it impacts on people with eating disorders in a similar way.
Right.
To control, you know, your body through what you put into it or not put into it, to stop yourself growing up thinking that you can, and you can't, of course. But kids do a lot of things out of an incomplete understanding of what it might mean. And so that's why they need through relationship, they need those things soothed, they need encouragement, they need understanding, they need acceptance, so that they can take those steps without those sort of fears. It's really hard to do.
Of course. What are your thoughts on the focus of unjustness? Do you mean injustice? I'm trying to infer, but at the same time, I don't want to mistake. Is that what you mean? Is it Natalie? I can't see. I'll let you respond to me before we go into that one. Let's have a look at what people are saying. We've got a few more minutes. Dulling to overcome the NPDA, alcohol. Yes, that's interesting. Okay, misdiagnosis of schizophrenia with autism. Does Wenn think there is?
Oh, I'm afraid so. I do, very clearly. And schizophrenia usually enters a person's life around the age of 17. And for some of us as autistic people, we're cottoning on to an understanding of various things at that age, but we might be talking out loud. We might be doing lots of things with our bodies that can be misunderstood. And of course, the things can co-occur. You can be autistic and schizophrenic, but they still need to be separately identified because they're very, very different things. And I remember the psychiatrist asking me if I heard voices, and I was listening to his voice at the time. And I remember thinking, silly man, you know, of course I hear voices. I was hearing his voice, but I said yes. And he said, what do those voices say to you? And I remember replying, well, it depends on whose voice it is and what they're wanting. So then he said, oh, you hear more than one? You know, it was like we were just missing each other the whole time. I'm not schizophrenic. I am autistic and always have been, but that was missed because behaviors that were being judged were not understood at the time.
Sure. I've just had a thought.
It still happens. I know it still happens.
Right. I've just had a thought as well. Consider a voice occurring or being spoken outside of our interest tunnel, you know, there could be a similar kind of experience to, how do I put this? It just popped into my head. A voice in my head versus a voice occurring outside my attention tunnel. You know, there could be something similar, because sometimes if I'm really hyper focused, it's like voices on the outside appear like thought forms, right? So without an understanding of Seika, you know, I might attribute that to voice hearing or something. You know, I technically am, but it's occurring outside the thought tunnel. Sorry, the intent tunnel. So it's like it's kind of other. It's being othered.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
It does, but the thing about being schizophrenic is the underlying kind of thing here is the difference between reality and non-reality. And for autistic people, sometimes that is actually quite hard to separate. What's real? What am I touching, tasting, feeling, knowing? Because our experience of it might be quite different.
Okay.
And that needs to be understood.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of what I was touching on. And because it exists outside of the attention tunnel, and I'm exclusively focusing on this right now, it's like it's coming from another reality almost.
Yeah.
So it's, yes, I noticed my son separating from the world because of the injustices he endures. I'm interested in what you think this experience is, so why this experience is so dominant for him.
My initial immediate response is to find out from him. He's the one who knows that answer, but we don't know him, and it's hard for us to speak on his behalf. In autism, it should always be nothing about me without me. So people should talk to us directly. And if a person doesn't do speech, then you find other ways, through story, through drama, through some kind of way. But injustice is massive, huge. And if that's that person's interest and that's what they're taking on board, they will feel that immensely, and possibly to keep themselves safe. Maybe they're camouflaging, who knows? You know, they will separate from it. But keep it out there. You've got kids who absolutely fascinated in the local train down here, totally fascinated by it. But as soon as you get anywhere near the train, they run the other way, terrified. And so there's this pull and push kind of feeling until they sort themselves out and work out what it is. Right. What can hurt me, what can't hurt me, what's over there, what's here, what's under, what's over, all those sorts of concepts take ages to sort out for a lot of us.
Sure. That's really interesting. Like it's an interest now, but get too close, it's kind of transforms it into something else. It goes from interest to threat, because suddenly it's disturbing my sensory stuff. So is there any research to see PDA as genetically linked?
So, no, there isn't. Not that I'm aware of.
No, but it is perhaps misleadingly so stated on the PDA Society website. Probably to ignore. Probably this is born out of clinical observation.
That's different to research as such. I mean, things run in families. Autism runs in families. A lot of genetic stuff runs in families because it's genetic and they're families. But so PDA will, by its very nature, be present in families. But I'm not aware of any research that is experientially showing.
Sure. Okay. When, if I said theory of mind, what comes into your head?
I laugh usually because there's far too much. It's kind of all been broken down, and the research used to say autistic people lacked a theory of mind, or lacked Tom. And I used to think, why not Dick or Harry? Sorry, Harry, but it's because it's theory of mind, TOM. Yeah, no, it isn't about theory of mind. It's about connection. When we're connected and we understand, we are as connected and as in tune as anybody else. But our connections are diminished and are different because of being single-minded. So we're not aware quite often of other things outside. Okay. And that can appear like we're lacking in empathy, but it's usually more to do with a non-understanding of what's happening.
Sure. That's an interesting point, because myself and my friends who are PDA will sit there and talk about people like middle-class, middle-aged women having a gossip, right? You know, we'll talk about people so relentlessly because we are just totally preoccupied with the minds of others, right? It's interesting because so long as the other person or other people are of interest to you as an autistic person, you know, the theory of mind concept kind of breaks down, really, you know, because it does come down to Saker again, like every single time, you know. But I find it interesting how, well, many of us are actually driven to understand the non-autistic mind, not because we're PDA, but because I'm relying on my observation skills right now to show me who I need to be and how I need to act. There's more of an incentive for the autistic person to understand neurotypical thinking because we have to live in a neurotypical world, and they have less of a bit of an incentive because they're the majority.
They are, and that's that double empathy problem that Damien Milton writes about so well.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's have a look. We have a couple more questions. Are you able to share about how you each respond to softer and more authoritarian styles of parenting or teaching, both therapeutic, low demand? Our son feels safer with more authoritarian.
Kids need safety. They need to know what's allowed and what isn't, and there are some things that are just not negotiable. I totally believe that. So it's not about softer or harder. It's about trusting that our parents are safe and are sure, and we can rely on them. When parents dither and are not, you know, and they keep changing their mind, and oh well, you know, maybe, or I hate it, because it leaves me stranded. So that's not helpful. So there are some things that are not negotiable. There are other things that we can get in there and work out and absolutely do together, which is based on relationship and mutual respect, not power. But yeah, allowing a kid to play with electric sockets that might end up killing themselves, no, it's not allowed. Running across roads, not allowed. And so we use words like not allowed or allowed rather than no, rather than don't. Sometimes we'll have things that, like you sign at the end of the road, that will say give way or say stop. We'll use those sorts of, that, you know, that's what's in their environment. We use that kind of terminology. And sometimes we turn it around and say to the child, what would you like me to stop? What would you like me to, you know, to be working with that is uncomfortable for you? What would you like me to do? So it's not softer or more authoritarian. It's working with and being sure in yourself as parents, so that a child that you have feels safe with you and sure too.
Okay. Harry, I know you feel school, as we know it, is not the place for many PDAers, but they crave to be a part of something. I'd like to hear you, and When, share your thoughts on how we can offer appropriate learning environments beyond just a supportive home, which may not be possible for families without privilege. We should campaign, but mainstream won't change enough.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always banging away for mainstream schools to adapt and to change. But every possible, if I get invited to give a talk, and even if I'm not invited, sometimes I'll do it anyway, constantly hammering in on this very, very, very thing. Some people cannot homeschool. My daughter homeschools her kids because school just would not accommodate them. But you know, that's not always possible. She had to give up her job as a teacher to homeschool her two daughters, and not everybody can do that. You've got to pay bills and you've got to live. So unfortunately, I think schools are not the best place for anybody, PDA or otherwise. They're just institutionalized setups that are power domains to rule it over kids quite often. But every now and then you'll get decent teachers and you'll get decent policy, and people listen. And if that's the case, you get in there fast and you work with.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily because of the institution and the ethos. It's usually down to the individual and how willing they are to be flexible and open. So yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna take one more question and then we're gonna wrap it up for today. So Brooklyn Nilsson says, I just found a study that connects humor with raising cognitive empathy in people. The ability to make dark jokes allows one to understand complicated concepts and take different perspectives. What I've been looking into for PDA is polyfragmented systems in OSDD that function where a dissociative mental fragment forms just to meet demands, then disappears once the task is complete and the person isn't really aware. I've met a lot of autistic systems whose alters identify as PDA, and I wonder if this is connected and how much, especially with becoming the task. Also, when I talk about I don't do anything, but when the activity and myself kind of meet in this state of alignment, I become it. So it's like speaking on the, so, you know, PDA, no social identity, no identity. It's like, no, bollocks to that. I know exactly who I am, but I can't be who you want me to be. I'm waiting to embody the activity such that that becomes my identity. In order to, sorry, I'm becoming the task in order to do it, and the other inner features of having a Loki and a dark passenger, you know, the inner, for those of you who don't understand the classical reference, I often describe the inner Loki, the mischief maker, and the dark passenger, the inner protector. We feel threatened and this ferocity comes out and protects us. Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you probably expressed them all totally well. I don't think I can add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's absolutely so, in my opinion.
Wonderful. Dr. Wenn Lawson, thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me today. This has been a really, really insightful and enlightening conversation, and I was really excited for this. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Harry. Thanks for inviting me.
Honestly, thank you. And yes, for those of you who tuned in this morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are, thank you as well. And please be sure to check out all of the links in the comment section so that you can follow Dr. Wenn Lawson more closely. Next week, I believe I'm actually speaking to my brother about his experiences with OCD. So be sure to...
Okay, very good.
And yeah, so thank you. I'm gonna stop recording now.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.